There is a new Overwatch dev blog, director's take, talking tanks, and upcoming hero balance changes. This just released. It's almost 12 a.m. for me. I'm really sleepy, but I really want to talk about this. I thought it was interesting. I read through the first lines and I was like, okay, this is interesting enough to do a video on it right away. So let's get started. So this is from, if I'm not mistaken, Aaron Keller. He's doing the director's take over here, talking about tanks and the upcoming hero balance changes. He starts off by saying, hey everyone, it's been a while since our last director's take. We've missed a few of these in recent months. Sorry for the gap. Speaking to all of you, will continue to be a priority for our team. Let's talk about tanks. Let me rephrase that. A lot of you are talking about tanks. I'd like to contribute from a developer point of view. He goes on to say, we've heard from players that the tank role is in a tough spot right now and has been since Season 8 ended. We agree. That's not to say that tanks were in a perfect spot before Season 9, but the problem now is that just don't wait. The problem now is that most of them just don't feel as tanky as they should. What? Okay, respectfully, I'm gonna disagree on this. There's a bunch of cases where tanks can feel unkillable, and then also, yes, I agree, there's a bunch of cases where tanks feel like they instantaneously blow up, but making tanks tankier is not going to be the solution. You have to address the underlying problems with either certain heroes or certain abilities in the game that enable that to be a thing. For example, Zenyatta's Discord Orb. I'm going to do a video on this in the near future where we're going to talk about why Discord Orb by itself ruins the tank role and the tank experience, especially in 5v5. Let's move on. So he goes on to say, many times, both support heroes need to focus solely on the tank to keep them alive. In this scenario, both the tank and support can feel like they have limited options in their gameplay as they're essentially tied to each other. But to be fair though, this is the gameplay that you guys encourage. This isn't something like, oh, well, you know, we kind of made the game have only one tank and now supports have to do their best to keep that one tank alive. And progressively, we're going to add the DPS passive that makes it harder to keep the tank alive. And so now both supports can't really go for aggressive angling or shooting away at the enemy. Instead, we're going to look at the tank and just heal bot on them. Like, the thing that I find so silly is there's never an admittance that we have created more new problems for ourselves in the 5v5 format. And now we don't know what to do about it. So we're going to try this other thing that we think could solve the problem. And it's like, well, realistically speaking, the answer is always going to be 6v6. I'm going to keep reading through this, but I can already see and feel it in my chest that I'm going to find something and it's going to be like, oh, they created this new problem and the answer to it is legitimately a second tank. Anyways, moving on. He goes on to say that our internal stats show this as well. We've come up with a new metrics in Season 9 that we simply call tankiness. It's roughly the number of deaths a hero experiences compared to how many deaths they ought to experience. What? Okay, whatever. There's a lot of stats that go into determining what an expected death is, and I'm not able to go into that level of detail here. The point is that your experience and our data are aligned. Since Season 9, almost all heroes in the game have become less tanky. This isn't all unintended. One of the issues we were addressing at the time was the sheer amount of burst damage and healing available. You know, why don't you nerf the healing in the game? Stop going around it with this DPS passive and everything, or certain characters doing too much burst damage. Address it. Like, address the problem. Address the characters that are doing this problem. Stop nerfing and changing characters that have nothing to do with these things. It's getting so ridiculous right now. Anyways, moving on. He goes on to say, however, most tanks, excluding Ball, who's pretty much the same, moved a lot further than heroes in other roles. Recent changes like headshot damage reduction on tanks had some effect on this, but it's still under where we would like for it to be. We still like many of the game-wide changes that were implemented over the last few seasons: the projectile size increase, the headshot damage and knockback reduction on tanks, and the passive health regeneration on all heroes. However, we're currently discussing is whether the path forward from here should be centered around broad systemic changes or per hero changes. We're discussing limited versions of the former. For instance, we're looking at reduced versions of the damage roll passive. Oh my god. I can't with this dev team. I can't. I can't. We've already tried the reduced DPS passive. If you want to move to the freaking lower DPS passive back to 15 or 10%, you have to nerf healing in this game. Did they like genuinely forget how nothing was dying when it was at 15%? And if I'm not mistaken, we didn't even have the 250 HP pulse. Or I think we did, I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember, guys. It's 12 a.m. for me now. As I'm recording this, it's now 12 a.m. I'm so tired. And this dev blog is just like, it's so disappointing to read. Hey guys, we created this new problem and then we tried to solve it, but instead we made a new problem. And now we're going to go back on the previous problem and then try that again and hope that it works out. Anyways, let's keep reading. So it goes on to say, however, we'd like to do more of the latter. Individual buffs or nerfs to heroes can have a dramatic impact on their effectiveness compared to a broad change that targets all heroes or a role. Additionally, it further reinforces the differences between heroes. For example, one of the reasons Reinhardt ought to feel tanky is through his shield. How does this relate to tanks? We're putting together a patch that is targeted at increasing the tankiness of many of these heroes, but we're doing it through individualized changes to each of them. Ideally, these changes would build on the hero's fantasy. Increasing the health of Reinhardt's shield is a good example of accomplishing both of those goals. Okay, first of all, if Ryan actually gets this shield HP increase, he's actually going to be incredibly powerful. He's really not that bad right now. He's really not that bad. I don't understand why we don't have this discussion that there's a lot, and I seriously mean a lot of bad tank players to begin with in general. Not a lot of people understand how to play tank. Now, does that mean that the tank problems are not there? No, of course not. I fully fundamentally agree. There's a massive tank problem in this game, but there's also a problem that people that play tank have no clue how to play it and play it like it's the DPS. It's a third DPS for the team when they should be understanding how to space create, space deny, etc., etc. Anyways, he goes on to say, this is a priority for our balance team, and right now we're targeting either mid-season 11 or season 12. We'll have more details on some of these changes to expect and more concrete timing soon. This touches on some discussions we've been having about balance philosophy in general. Balance in the game is very nuanced. It doesn't just depend on the total power level or win rate of a hero. We look at the pick rate, the skill tier, the region, and the platform, not to mention a myriad of other individual stats like the amount of damage, death, and kills heroes have. On top of stats, design goals and community perception also guided decisions. Honestly, it generally just feels like it is community perception that guides their decisions. Unless you're a fan of Genji and Mercy and Hanzo, then you pretty much don't get to ever let your hero be even slightly good. Anyways, he goes on to say some of the recent metas have brought into question the different ways we look at balancing heroes that could be considered niche. There are heroes that the community was okay with having both a high win rate and a high pick rate. When Ryan hits a 60% win rate, which is considered very high for us, and is played often, there are very few complaints. When a hero like Roadhog does this, however, he recently topped out at around 54%. The community reacts differently. I particularly want to comment on this before we move on. How is it that 8 years later they realized this? This has been something that was even there during the 6v6 era. Like, was Aaron, I know he was a part of the Overwatch team then, and he did have, he was still a big boy when he was a part of the Overwatch team. Did he like not sit down and like, did that team like never realize people just like to play Reinhardt? Because like, what is the difference between Ryan and Roadhog? Reinhardt plays the game in an honest fashion. Roadhog doesn't. Roadhog tries to go around some of the fundamentals in this game, not to mention the fact that he's not even designed as as an actual tank. Reinhardt is designed to be an actual tank, and everything he does feels fair. Granted that some of the things that he does can feel annoying, everything in Ryan's kit feels fair and earned. If he's up in your face and he's damaging you, that's because you let him get that close. If Reinhardt landed in an Earth Shatter, well, he deserves it for the timing, and this is this. And you guys see where I'm going with this, right? Roadhog, while yes, does have mechanical skill tied to his hook and cook combo, the problem with Roadhog is that's legitimately all he has going for him. So unless that is powerful, nothing else about Roadhog is going to help him actually do anything that a traditional tank in Overwatch is supposed to do. And that is why when Reinhardt has a high win or pick rate, people don't complain, because Ryan playing with, against, and as him is much more fun and fair to the general roster of the game than a character like Roadhog. I sincerely hope they understand this. Moving on, there are heroes that the community deems more. There are heroes that the community deems more fair, or at least less frustrating than others. That is true. That is true. They need to learn what those heroes are. This is the extremely important thing. He goes on to say the mechanics of some heroes, especially at really high levels of play, requires us to pay more attention to them. Okay, so again, the mechanics of some heroes, especially at really high levels of play, requires us to pay more attention to them. Yeah, but you don't. Sojourn was such a dominant pick for so long at high level play because you refused to address her, and then you gave her a buff. where you didn't even you didn't even tell people why you buffed it. It was just like, no, we're just gonna buff Sojourn for no reason. Come on now. We still want every hero to be competitively viable. Didn't Alec Dawson just say, like on the Coach Spilo interview, that not every hero is going to be competitively viable? Huh? Anyways, and we love that some of our heroes can be the right situational pick, but we think it's healthier for the game for us to proactively, in a more timely manner, manage certain heroes and prevent them from dominating. But this is your personal bias. You're not listening to the community when it comes to this point, that we can manage certain heroes and prevent them from dominating. Like, in what world was Hanzo dominating the game to the point that you had to strip his entire identity? In what world was Genji ever the meta-defining pick in the game, where you decided you're gonna strip everything about his kit that gives him a remote of a playmaking chance? In what world did you see Mercy as a dominating pick that you were like, okay, well, we're gonna have to just tone her down in every way possible and make her movement clunky? It's so silly, because it is legitimately a pick and choose of, well, which heroes do we like at the development team, and then which heroes are actually considered pretty fair. Granted that some of them might be annoying and some of them might feel a little bit, somewhat frustrating to play against, but they have a wide variety of options to be dealt with, you know. Anyways, I have a video coming on this in more depth soon, where I'll talk about which heroes are fair and which heroes are, like, considered unfair or unhealthy for Overwatch, and why. So he goes on to say, in that vein, where is Bannis in the first few days of Season 11? He says, on the tank side, there's no standout winner with D.Va, Sigma, Winston, Queen, Heart, and Zarya in the upper half. Their win rates are between 50 to 55%. With damage, Pharah continues to excel at around 58%. Holy shit. They need to nerf the shit out of Pharah. I was going to do the Pharah video anyway. Anybody who saw the community post knows that there's a Pharah video coming up soon, where I'm going to basically rant about the state of Pharah. And then he goes on to talk about Reapers at 55%. I just told you guys the Reaper buff was good. And May is at 50%. Yeah, so May just has to stay bad. Like, that's unfortunate. May has to be a niche pick. So they've risen, and Sojourn has dramatically fallen around 44%. Yikes, Blizzard, don't leave her. She's okay. She's okay. The reason she might have dropped so much in her win rate is because of the way her projectile is interacting with the armor. There's smart ways to balance Sojourn to make her feel better, but please let it play out. There's also the fact that not many people are going to play her because of the other meta picks available right now. And she also doesn't do well against Pharah. I really hope they don't skyrocket Sojourn back to relevancy. Anyways, and supports are still relatively stable, with 𝐒𝐈𝐈 being the biggest mover, rising a few percentage points to 55%. So 𝐒𝐈𝐈 got, a massive power creep. I think everybody agrees that, 𝐒𝐈𝐈 is very strong right now. But this is the problem I have with this dev blog, okay? A lot of what they're talking about, a lot of what they're saying here, they're acting so strange and surprised that these things are happening. They're like so strange and surprised that, well, the tank problem still isn't solved. Well, like, why are supports heal botting now? Like, why is all these things happening? It's like, well, you kept creating these problems. When I did my videos on 5v5 and 6v6, and I know this is an annoying topic to talk about, but I feel like, fundamentally speaking here, people don't understand why 6v6 or having a second tank, it can solve all these problems. It is so unreal for how, when the power is distributed between two different characters, being able to, specialize in doing one thing, the other doing another thing, you're able to cover a wide variety of not only gameplay styles and choices, but also playmaking and play denying. The problem with the tank is facing right now, is having one tank means that a lot of the attention is also diverted to them. You've not necessarily done anything that encourages shooting squishies, when, when it comes to playmaking, blowing up the tank is still the safest option of play. The tanks are also somewhat difficult to kill on this patch right now as we speak. There's so much to talk about that's wrong with 5v5. Okay, I might do a more in-depth video, but I just wanted to bring up some talking points. That what I find disappointing about this dev blog is, how do I explain this? It's a whole lot of nothing. Okay, and the solution to all of this is, well, we're gonna nerf the DPS passive. And the thing I hate about this is, didn't you buff up the DPS passive because DPS as a role couldn't play make? So if we're going to nerf the DPS passive, don't you think a wide variety of DPS should get compensating buffs, especially characters like Genji and Hanzo? I mean, hit scan will be relatively fine. They were okay back in 15%. The problem was still the projectile DPS role not being able to perform because there's just so much HP and still so much healing going around. And I asked this question again: do we really need to go back to a reduced version of the damage roll passive? Seriously, it's something to think about. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you want to support the channel for free, hit like and subscribe. If you want to, support me financially, Patreon and stuff is up. I'm gonna go sleep now. Let's talk about this in the comments tomorrow morning. With that being said, I will see you in the next one.